People who went missing. What happened? When I was 4, I got lost in a city and was rescued by what my dad thought was a gang. We had dinner in Chinatown with another family, 5 kids in all. Crossing the street after dinner, we were holding hands in a big chain. My older sibling let go. When the light changed and everyone crossed, I stayed on the sidewalk. I was looking through a window into a barber shop where some huge guy was having his head shaved. I can still picture the scene. When I finally looked around, everyone was gone. I started to cry and a group of teenagers approached me and asked if I was lost. I said yes. A tall kid hoisted me onto his shoulders and started down the block. Other kids split up and went in different directions. We rounded a corner and I saw my dad. He turned white and ran towards us. The kid lowered me to the ground. A few other kids were there. They stood around awkwardly while the tall kid explained what happened to my dad. My dad, not a demonstrative guy, flung himself at the kid and hugged him. My mom appeared and picked me up. Years later, my dad told me he saw the same group of kids hanging around when he first parked in the city that evening and was suspicious that they were a gang. He was embarrassed and tried to be less judgmental after that. Wish I could thank those guys. This was a long time ago. Even if it was a gang of kids, it still makes sense that they would look out for other kids. I feel like from what I've seen or heard, it's pretty common for people in gangs to be like, yeah, I don't really want other people to be involved in this life. And also, they seem to be always looking out for kids. Most groups, even of organized criminals, just respect children. As they should. Story 2. I was at a college house party. I went there with several friends. I didn't have a cell phone yet, managed to hold out until 2004. Our dorm rooms came with landlines at the time. I ended up going home with a guy and hooking up with him. Woke up the next day, checked my email on his computer and found a ton of frantic emails from my friends. They thought that I'd been abducted, roofied, or unalived myself. I was very depressed at the time. They filed a missing person report on me with campus security and several friends were searching for me in the woods. Story 3. I was hiking to see the volcanic eruption back in 2010, the one before all the grounded flights. On the way back, I got separated from my group. We were about 8 to 10, one of which was a very good friend of mine. Anyway, I tend to walk pretty fast, especially on my way down a mountain. This was in March in Iceland, so it gets dark pretty soon and fast. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have my flashlight on me, and in maybe half an hour, everything went pitch black. I'd chosen to walk the same path as the one I went up. This was extremely stupid of me, as that path was about 5 meters away from a 15-meter drop into a canyon. Not only that, but the path was beside a waterfall. Waterfalls tend to have a lot of mist coming from them. Said mist goes onto the path, and because this is March in Iceland and on a mountain, it's about -5 degrees Celsius without wind chill. That mist basically turns to an ice skating rink on a 45-degree angle. That was an experience. I'd been lost for about 5 hours. I didn't turn up until I got down from the mountain, but I was one of 20 that got lost that Saturday, 2 of whom died. Icelandic SAR groups were quite busy at that time. Story 4. My high school American football team had an away game in a somewhat sketchy city. Bus took the team back to high school afterwards. I was too young to drive and I was grounded and had my phone taken away. I waited at the school for an hour and a half, but my parents never came to pick me up. So I started the 4-mile walk back to my house carrying all my pads and school books. While I was walking back, my mom showed up and I wasn't there. She panicked and found the coach and told him. My coach sent a group text to the entire team asking if anyone knew where I was. Came to school the next day and everyone thought I had missed the bus and gotten lost. It ended up being a team joke for the rest of the year. Bonus, my parents never took away my phone again. Story 5. It was winter break of my freshman year of college. I'd just gotten dumped, I was depressed, I just wanted to be alone. I had a decent amount of money, so I rented an extended stay hotel for 2 weeks. Bought enough food and supplies for 2 weeks and shut off my cell phone and didn't go outside for 2 weeks. When I returned home, my family yelled at me for several hours and I had received over 200 phone calls and over 500 text messages. 10 out of 10 would highly recommend. Okay, as narrator, I can't say I recommend personally. Just to let a couple people know where you're going and what's happening. That's all. People care about you. They just want to know that you're alright at the very least. Story 6. My friend and I were 15 at the time when we were both drugged and taken various places within the state for 3 days. During this time, we were constantly separated, reunited, drugged, emotionally/physically abused, and honestly feared that we would end up dead. For 3 days, we were constantly on the move. We never visited any homes. They made us sleep in wooded areas with thin blankets, separated from each other. This was during winter, although there was no snow yet. The man, sounds strange calling him a man, that I was with was nicer than the other. He seemed to be the follower. He never did anything as cruel as the other did. But to this day, I can't stand certain names, accents, clothing, looks in general. When I say he was nicer, it's because he was rather gentle instead of forceful. On the third day, they took us to a town about 40 miles south of our home in the middle of frankly nowhere. It's a town with one gas station and a few homes. They left us on the mountainside, told us the common, "If you call the police, blah blah blah, we'll kill you, blah 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 blah." We were there for a while before another car came around. Hunting is rather popular around those parts. The guys who found us thought we'd been stabbed or shot. Looking back, I was a frickin' chaotic mess as they tried to approach us. I became very defensive as my friend was still mostly lethargic and I didn't believe that they were there to help us. Another half hour maybe passed and police finally showed up. I hadn't felt so happy to see officers before in my entire life, because I'd been one of those screw the police kind of girls back then. I remember falling and just crying. I remember grabbing my friend and telling her it was going to be okay. About a week later, they found the guys, arrested them, and they went to prison for some time. They both pled guilty for reduced sentences. The drugs they gave us make a lot of the details sketchy, so I can't really remember too much. I have scars still, and I have trust issues. My friend, on the other hand, turned to drugs quickly after, and we've lost touch. Thank you, everyone, for such kind words. Also, there are common questions that keep coming up, so I'll just add them here for ease. 1. How did they take you? How did it begin? We met them at the local mall. After about an hour or so, they offered us dinner from a local truck shop just out of town. They had cheap food and pretty dang good food at that. After dinner, we drove around for a bit believing they were just going to take us home as we were pretty close. From there, the start of the situation began. 2. What drugs did they give you? Over the course of 3 days, we were given different drugs. And I'm not sure about how many my friend was given or what kind, but I know I was given, among other things, painkillers, Adderall, ecstasy, Ambien, and a form of an assault drug. 3. How old were they? One had just turned 18 and the other was 19. 4. What type of abuse happened? I still don't really like to talk about it, and I'll just paste what I've already written to someone else. To this day, I'm not 100% sure what happened to my friend, but some of the things that happened to me were slapped, kicked, hair grabbed, forced to perform intimate acts, and some other things. Well, for all the people who went missing for somewhat benign reasons, there was bound to be at least one in here that was not good. This sounds like an absolutely horrific situation, OP. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I hope you're doing better now. Story 7. So, back when I was in Boy Scouts, my troop lost me twice in the same night, while I was still in my tent. This is not an exaggeration. The story is thus. We were at a camp in Iowa. We had the idea to go and perform a raid on the counselors' tents/cabins. I, however, was feeling ill, so I specifically said, "I'm not feeling well, I am going to sleep." They acknowledged this, expressed regret that I was not coming along, and went to have their fun. They have their fun, they retreat into the wood line. Then, they take a head count. I am not in the head count. They expect me to be in the head count because they forgot. So now, there is a missing camper. The entire camp is set to searching for me. Sometime during this, a guy from my troop decides to, get this, check the tents. I am in my tent, as I should be. So he goes to report that I am found. I go to the bathroom during this time. Someone comes back to the camp and checks my tent. I'm in the bathroom and not in my tent, so I am now missing again. I get found sooner that time. Story 8. I was living with my new husband in a town about 1,000 miles away from my mother, who has always been a world-class warrior. This was in the days before everyone had a cell phone. His entire family was going to be invading us for a few days, so I was polishing up the apartment to look good, and in the process of wiping fingerprints off the phone, I turned the ringer off and didn't notice. We had just moved in, so several days without any calls wasn't unusual. Fast forward. The in-laws have just arrived while I'm lying down in the bedroom taking a nap because I've been spit shining everything in the place and making tasty baked goods, all while coming down with a bad cold. There's a knock on the door. My husband comes to the bedroom and says there's someone who wants to talk to me. It's the police, and they insist on talking to me alone in the hallway to make sure everything is really, truly okay. Then they tell me to call my mother. I come back in to see his parents, sister, brother-in-law, their 7 kids, and a passel of assorted aunts, uncles, and cousins all staring silently at me. But wait, there's more. Mom didn't have our address. All she had was a description of the building. The town was small enough that the police knew just where that was, but they didn't know what apartment, so they knocked on every other door in the building before getting to us on the top corner unit. If I had to guess, I would say this is the first time OP has moved out of state, or even out of town from where they grew up, because this is some top tier mother worrying. Unfortunate that they turned the ringer off on the phone. There's very little way to communicate back then. Depending on what era this is, could have been an email, but I don't know. I've never trusted parents with technology and stuff like that, so no email kind of also makes sense to me. Seems like an unfortunate situation and a very careful mother. Story 9. I was about 10 or so, and I was a member of a club where I learned to shoot air rifles. My parents would drop me off, then go and take off again, and pick me up when it was time. One day, they didn't show up. I waited for an hour, called home, and no answer. This was before cell phones, so I was stuck. No idea what to do. Well, I did have one idea. I knew how to get home. It would be about 6 kilometers walking, but I had a good mental map of the way back and the weather was fine. So I left the club and began to walk home. I made it about halfway before my parents pulled over next to me and they were kind of angry with me. Also kind of apologetic because they'd forgotten about me. They told me to not wander off like that again, and I told them to not forget about me again. Didn't get any punishment. Story 10. When I was a young lad, my brother and I used to go to this gymnastics play area. They had trampolines, those bars you swing around, and a tightrope over a pit full of pieces of foam. My brother and I decided to play hide and seek. I hid first. About an hour later, the place is closing. My mom asks my brother where I am. He says we're playing hide and seek and I've hidden really well. 3 hours later, the staff have locked all of the doors and phoned the police. My mom was in a blind panic. My brother had given up on finding me and was bouncing on a trampoline. The staff were frantically tearing apart the place looking for me. My brother got bored of the trampoline, so decided to play in the foam pit. He jumped in and heard a loud, "Ouch!" I climbed out of the foam and said, "Did I win?" We never went back to that place. How did the staff not check the foam pit first? When I think of places to hide in a gymnasium type area like that, I think of the foam pit. Where else could he have been hiding? This one's confusing to me. How did no adult think to check in the foam pit? Story 11. When I was 16, I got into a fight with my mother about how to properly load dishes into a dishwasher. Actually, she yelled a lot and I failed to react. They were frickin' dishes, who cares? At that point in my life, she was running her own business and my father was working full time. So all of the chores in the house were being done by me personally anyway, and at that point I'd been loading the dishwasher incorrectly for the better part of 6 years, and felt it didn't matter if she thought it was wrong now. Well, I decided that telling her that was the way to end the argument. As you can probably predict, it did not. She threw me out of the house. In typical teenage fashion, I told her if she threw me out, I wasn't coming back. At that point, she had escalated to white-hot rage, and said something like, "We don't want you here anyway." Well, that was all I needed. And she really should have been paying better attention to me. See, I had gotten a job as soon as I had turned 14 and I had purchased my own car. I'd been buying my own clothes and things for years with money from that job. I left and could honestly say that I haven't taken anything from the house that I hadn't personally paid for. To that end, I left my cell phone on the table. They had no way to get in contact. So, hours later, when my mother's anger faded and she realized that she had just thrown her 16-year-old child into the streets over dishes, she called the police. Well, the police showed up and heard her out. They put out the details on my car to try to find me, but they told her that since I had a car and clothes and my own bank account and I'd been gone for hours, there was no guarantee that I was even in the state anymore. They really only started looking so soon as a favor to my mother. They weren't required to look at all since it was clear that I was a runaway that had left under my own power. My father came home from work and was bewildered by the chaos. I wish I could have seen his face. After 48 hours, they had declared me missing, which apparently made my profile available to other states and such. And that was how they found me. 2 weeks later, 18 hours away, I was sitting on the hood of my car eating ice cream and filling out a job application. An officer noticed I was illegally parked and casually scanned my plates while he approached me to ask me to move. I don't think he was going to give me a ticket, it was just a reflexive action. I came up as a missing kid and he stopped mid-question and sort of stutters, You should call your mother." I nodded agreeably and he gave me his cell phone. I dialed my mother's number from heart and she picked up. As soon as I identified myself, she turned into a screaming rage monster of hatred and insults. I casually put the phone on speaker for the officer to hear and his eyes widened. She didn't stop to take a breath and let me get a word in, so I hung up on her. I told the officer I was fine where I was, and since it had already escalated to this point, I was going to hold out for an apology, or divine intervention. He sort of patted my shoulder and made sure I had someplace warm to sleep at night. 2 days later, my dad showed up and got me. The officer had called the department that the missing persons report originated from and got my father's contact details and told him that if the situation was left to my mother to resolve, they would never see me again. I agree that it was for the best. I could have gotten my GED and a job, but I certainly wouldn't have been able to make my way through college and get my master's. Story 12. A few years ago, I was depressed and not really very social to begin with. At some point, my boyfriend at the time broke up with me and I just snapped. I booked a train ticket to him, around a 10-hour ride, and just left the next morning. Also basically stopped going to work at the same time, from one day to the next. I told no one about the trip and stayed away for about 10 days. When I came back, I had a note from the police on my door about being registered as a missing person. I lived in a student house, so at least everyone on my floor must have seen that note. Turns out my friends had filed a missing persons report because I guess work had contacted them. I was angry at the time because I felt like crap and thought no one cared about me anyway, and shouldn't interfere with my life. Ironically, the fact that they did this showed that they did indeed care. Now, I'm grateful they did it. Yeah, going somewhere and not going to work, not going to school, not talking to any of your friends for 10 days would get people concerned about you. But I also understand the post-breakup mentality of no one loves me, I'm out of here, just the general vibe. So I can't fault the ideas that got OP to do that, I guess. I still wouldn't recommend it though. Story 13. I was missing for 8 hours after my very first day of first grade, and mobilized the entire police force of the rural town where I grew up. Before I was old enough for school, my single mom used to drop me off at a daycare place every day and pick me up every evening. This was in '86, so way before cell phones or pagers were common. When I got old enough for first grade, my mom took me out of daycare because it was expensive and school would be my daycare now. My school was brand new. My first day would also be the first day the school was open. It was also the principal's first day as principal and my teacher's first day as a full-time teacher. My mom did all the right things before she put me on the bus. She wrote my bus number in permanent marker on the back of my hand, gave me specific instructions, and made me repeat them back to her, put all of her contact info in my pockets, etc. The first day at school was perfectly normal. I wrote ABCs, drew pictures with crayons, etc. Just like in daycare. My only specific memory was the cafeteria staff bringing our lunches into the classroom because the construction in the cafeteria wasn't done yet. School gets out and I head to the buses, staring dutifully at the bus number written on my hand. But the after-school pickup van from the daycare we used to attend was also there. The staffer from the daycare recognized me as I was walking by and called out, "Hey, we're over here. Come on, we're about to leave." I guess she didn't know or didn't remember that my mom had taken me out of daycare. Anyway, this lady was a known adult authority figure, so I assumed plans had changed and I got on the bus. 3 stories happening at this point. Story 1. 6-year-old me had the best day at daycare ever. All my old friends were there. We talked about our first day at school. We played and played and played and seemed to last forever. Even after all my friends' mommies came to pick them up and I was the only one left, I had all the toys to myself. I was so confused when my mom finally arrived, crying and bawling like I'd never seen before. Story 2. My mom gets off work and waits at my bus stop. I don't get off the bus. She calls the school and they mobilize the whole staff to look for me. Maybe I'm hiding in a bathroom. They don't find me. Hours have passed and now she's in full freak-out mode. She calls the police. The police start searching the fields and farms near the school. Still no me. They bring in more officers and more officers until pretty much the entire force of this tiny town is looking for me. Meanwhile, my principal and my teacher are having the worst days of their lives. How did they lose a freaking 6-year-old on the first day? All the searching turns up nothing, and it's past midnight now. So some poor officer had to tell my mom, "Ma'am, you should go home. We'll keep looking all night, but we won't be able to find much until the morning." My mom goes home thinking her baby is probably dead and arrives home to find her answering machine full. Story 3. It's 2 hours past closing time and this kid's mom still hasn't picked him up. Didn't she cancel her service last week? Why is he even here? Call her again. Her answering machine is full. We better get overtime for this. So yeah, I managed to upset an entire school system and traumatize my mother on my first day of school. I still refuse to accept responsibility. I was just doing what the grown-ups told me. This is so understandable. I'm on OP's side here. I don't even think it's OP's fault at all. As a 6-year-old, you do what an adult tells you to do, especially if you know them. It's a trusted adult and, as OP said, an authority figure. And they were like, "Hey, come on, OP, come on, get on the bus or whatever." And OP was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds good to me." And they went. I also don't necessarily think it's their fault. Like, they should have known that OP wasn't in a daycare anymore, I guess. But yeah, before pagers or cell phones, I guess there's really no way to tell the mother where OP is. But yeah, poor principal and teacher, first days of the job, and this happens. Unlucky. Anyway, it's all the stories we have for today. I hope you enjoyed, learned something, or felt something. I don't know. I also hope you have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are. I'll see you in the next one.